On May 27, 1942, at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the clock on the wall inside Admiral Nimitz's headquarters indicated 0800 hours. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton entered the room carrying a folder filled with meticulously detailed intelligence that would astonish anyone outside this particular space. Layton informed his superior that the Japanese were planning to attack Midway Island. They would approach from the northwest on a bearing of 325 AV and be detected around 175 miles offshore. The assault was scheduled for 0700 hours on June 4th. Admiral Nimitz regarded Layton with an unwavering calm, which had earned him his reputation as one of America's most trusted leaders. "You're saying you know precisely where Yamamoto will be when he'll arrive and what he intends to do," the Admiral stated. Layton confirmed, "Yes, sir. We have access to every order, position report, and communication between Japanese commanders. Our knowledge encompasses their entire battle strategy." The room was silent as Nimitz absorbed this information. At that moment, he realized that the United States Navy held an asset far more potent than any battleship or bomb: the ability to decipher Japan's most confidential plans. What they didn't yet comprehend fully was that this revelation marked the culmination of 2 decades of diligent and methodical effort. The success in cracking Japanese codes had not occurred suddenly. It was the result of years of rigorous preparation, exceptional mathematical skills, and unwavering dedication from individuals working in secluded basement offices away from any combat zone. The intelligence Layton shared would enable Nimitz to devise a trap so well calibrated that historians would later describe the ensuing battle as one of the most pivotal naval engagements in American history. The origins of America's capability to decipher Japanese naval communications can be traced back years before Pearl Harbor, when a small group of linguists and mathematicians in quiet offices recognized the impending war. This effort was initiated in the early 1920s by Lawrence Safford, a young naval officer who foresaw that future conflicts would involve more than just weaponry but also information warfare. Known later as the father of Navy cryptology, Safford founded the first organized code-breaking unit within the Navy in 1924. Though modest at its inception, with only a few officers working manually to decode potential adversaries' communications, Safford predicted that Japan's rise as a Pacific power would pose a significant threat to American interests. He began recruiting individuals with specialized skills: linguists who had experienced life in Japan, mathematicians adept at discerning order from disorder, and radio operators skilled in signal interception. By the early 1930s, intercept stations were established across the Pacific, including one in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, another in Cavite, Philippines, and a third in Washington. These locations would become key components of America's signals intelligence network. Among those Safford recruited was Joseph Rochefort, whose career became closely linked to breaking Japanese codes. Rochefort joined the Navy in 1918 at age 17, enlisting under false pretenses during World War I. Early on, he demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for languages and puzzles, which caught the attention of his superiors. Rather than deploying him to sea, they assigned him to work with early cryptographic efforts in Washington. In 1929, Rochefort was sent to Tokyo, where he spent 3 years mastering Japanese language, culture, military structure, and communication patterns among Japanese officers. During this time, he met Edwin Layton, another young officer whose understanding of Japan would be crucial for future conflicts. Both men were united by their fascination with Japan and a shared belief that comprehending the enemy's language and cultural nuances would be vital in any impending war. On June 1, 1939, the Japanese put into use their most advanced naval coding system. American cryptographers labeled it as JN-25, where EJN stood for Japanese Navy, and 25 signified that this was the 25th identified Japanese naval code system. Unlike basic substitution ciphers, JN-25 was a complex deciphered code involving 2 distinct steps to transmit messages securely. Firstly, Japanese operators would refer to a codebook containing roughly 33,000 entries, each represented by a 5-digit number group. However, these numbers were not transmitted directly. Instead, an additional layer of encryption was applied using additive tables from another book. This involved combining the original 5-digit code group with another randomly generated 5-digit number, creating a third set of digits that had no apparent connection to the initial code. To decode messages, American and British cryptographers needed to reverse this process by subtracting the additive numbers to reveal the underlying code groups before matching them back to their meanings in the code book. By late 1940, these analysts had made significant progress in understanding the structure of JN25 and had identified approximately 3,800 out of the estimated 33,000 code groups, or roughly 10%. Despite this progress, breaking the entire code was still a monumental task due to limited resources and the complexity of the system. However, on December 5, 1940, the Japanese introduced a significant change by implementing an entirely new code book. This updated version would later be referred to as JN205B by cryptographers. The interpretation of each code group had been altered, forcing the cryptanalysts to start anew. They embarked on a painstaking task of reconstructing their understanding by meticulously identifying individual code groups through traffic analysis, educated guessing about frequent phrases, and ingenious deduction. By October 1941, they were starting to make headway once more. Approximately 1,500 code groups had been decoded by then. There was growing optimism that by the next spring, they could read current messages with a fair degree of accuracy. However, these hopes faced an abrupt halt on December 4, 1941, when the Japanese altered their additive tables to a new system referred to as Additive 8. Although this change wasn't as devastating as a complete overhaul of the codebook, it still necessitated that the cryptanalysts determine the new additives before they could decipher messages, a process expected to take several weeks. On December 7, 1941, when Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor, the cryptographers felt a deep sense of failure. They had been laboring on JN25 for more than 2 years and wondered if earlier progress or the absence of the additive change on December 4th might have tipped them off to the approaching attack force. This question would linger in their minds, especially for Joseph Rochefort, who was appointed to oversee Station Hypo at Pearl Harbor in June 1941. In a basement of the 14th Naval District Administration building near Pearl Harbor's submarine base, a nondescript concrete structure seldom noticed, transformations were taking place. Below ground level and accessible only through narrow staircases guarded by security checkpoints, there was a room that would serve as the command center for the Pacific War. Station Hypo, stretching 60 feet in length and devoid of windows, was lit by constant humming fluorescent lights. Despite the air conditioning's efforts to manage the heat from IBM tabulating machines and numerous analysts working tirelessly around the clock, the space remained uncomfortably warm. Here, Joseph Rochefort and his team would conduct their critical operations. Rochefort was an unconventional leader by any measure. He frequently pushed himself through grueling 72-hour work periods while staying in his basement. To cope with the cold temperatures caused by the air conditioning at night, he wore a smoking jacket and slippers. For days on end, he neglected grooming habits like shaving. His routine also included heavy smoking and drinking vast amounts of coffee. Despite these quirks, he insisted on top performance from himself and his team. Many members were personally selected by him. Among them was Thomas Deere, an exceptional cryptanalyst who played a pivotal role in deciphering JN25 and developed methods for using IBM machines to process encrypted messages. Another key member was Alva Laswell, a Japanese language specialist who had studied in Tokyo and could grasp the intricacies of military communications. Hamright worked alongside Deere on some of the toughest code groups. Joseph Finnegan, a mathematician whose contributions to daytime group analysis were vital, also formed part of this dedicated team. Alongside these individuals were dozens of enlisted men, many musicians from the USS California Band, which had been sunk at Pearl Harbor. As they had no other options, they joined Hypo. Many turned out to have the analytical and mathematical skills necessary for code breaking. Rochefort thought that musicians who could read sheet music possessed pattern recognition abilities that perfectly suited identifying recurring number sequences in encrypted messages. The task was extraordinarily tedious. A captured message might include 205 digit groups, each needing meticulous processing. First, any known additives had to be stripped away before attempting a match with its intended meaning from among the 33,000 possible options. In early 1942, only a few hundred meanings were identified, leaving most of the intercepted content unintelligible until they struck upon occasional breakthroughs. A code group might represent a ship's name or location, and sometimes even include dates, though these elements had an extra layer of security applied to them. Analysts would then attempt to decipher the meaning behind these fragments to determine which ships were involved, their destinations, and estimated arrival times. Traffic analysis filled in many gaps. Even if individual messages couldn't be decoded, much could still be gleaned from the patterns of communication, such as who was talking to whom, how frequently they communicated, and from what locations. An uptick in radio traffic between specific commands often indicated that an operation was being planned. If a ship's call sign went quiet, it usually meant the vessel had gone dark, likely because it was near its target. The critical breakthrough came towards the end of December 1941. Just weeks after Pearl Harbor, when a station in the Philippines made significant progress on deciphering the new additive system. They shared their findings with Hypo and Washington-based codebreakers. Collaboration between stations would prove crucial, but also led to later bureaucratic conflicts. By January 1942, Rochefort's team was decoding parts of JN255B. Although they couldn't read full messages, managing about one word in 5, this was sufficient to start understanding Japanese intentions. They discovered that the Japanese were planning operations in the South Pacific and detected preparations for an attack on Port Moresby in New Guinea by February. As Japanese forces advanced through Southeast Asia and the Dutch East Indies in March and April, codebreakers tracked their movements, providing Nimitz with intelligence to position his forces effectively. The work was grueling. Rochefort and Dia took turns manning 24-hour shifts that often stretched to 36 or even 48 hours continuously. The basement room became their entire world. They ate there, slept on cots there, worked there until they were mentally drained. Even when they managed to sleep, they would frequently dream in 5-digit number groups. IBM machines hummed constantly as punch cards were sorted and patterns sought out. In a matter of hours, machines could process information that humans would take weeks to handle, yet they were limited to spotting patterns. The interpretation and discernment needed to transform raw data into actionable intelligence still depended on human intellect. By April 1942, Hypo was decrypting roughly 20% of JN255B communications, a significant achievement in just 4 months. Crucially, this decryption encompassed the most pertinent 20%. They had managed to decode specific code groups for ship names, locations, military units, and common phrases related to operational planning. Consequently, even when parts of a message remained unreadable, analysts could often deduce critical details, such as what operation was being discussed, where it would take place, and approximately when. This scenario set the stage for late April 1942, when references emerged pointing towards a significant military operation scheduled for early June. The target location was identified through a recurring code, Group F. A pivotal question arose: what did AF signify? Cryptanalysis indicated that A often denoted locations in or around the Hawaiian Islands, instances of AH being used to represent all who were noted. As such, AF could potentially refer to another site nearby, given its strategic importance and geographical position approximately 1,000 miles northwest of Honolulu at the extremity of the Hawaiian chain. Midway Atoll seemed a likely candidate. Taking Midway would grant Japan an advanced base from which to threaten Hawaii directly. However, this interpretation faced opposition from other analysts in Washington who speculated that AF might actually refer to Johnston Island or even the Aleutian Islands. Some suggested that Japan could be preparing another southern push towards Fiji or Samoa. Admiral Annis King, who led the U.S. fleet from Washington, remained doubtful. He had never fully trusted Rochefort due to perceived insubordination, as he frequently bypassed the chain of command to communicate directly with Nimitz via Leighton. Roche required concrete evidence, otherwise positioning America's limited carrier resources to defend Midway while Japan struck elsewhere would be disastrous. The U.S. Navy in the Pacific boasted only 3 operational carriers. Enterprise and Hornet were in good shape, but Yorktown had been severely damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea earlier that May and was limping back to Pearl Harbor. In contrast, Japan could deploy at least 6 carriers, including those responsible for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the Japanese combined fleet, had never lost a naval engagement. His troops were seasoned, confident, and victorious for over half a year. A misstep by Nimitz could lead to the loss of America's entire carrier fleet, potentially derailing the Pacific War before it fully unfolded. The outcome hinged on whether AF was indeed Midway. In mid-May 1942, Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes from Rochefort's staff proposed a clever strategy. If Japan monitored American radio transmissions, and if AF referred to Midway, perhaps they could诱使日本人确认这一点。计划很简单但巧妙。中途岛将发送一条未该加密的无线电信息，内容具体到足以被日本截获并相信，并且紧急程度足够高，使得日本可能在自己的编码通信中报告他。罗斯福把这想法告诉了莱特顿，莱特顿又向尼米兹汇报了这个计划。Nimitz gave immediate approval. On May 19, he dispatched a submarine cable to the commanding officer at Midway, ensuring that this communication would not be intercepted by the Japanese. The message instructed Midway to transmit in clear language without any encryption that their water distillation plant had malfunctioned and they urgently required fresh water supplies. On May 20, Midway broadcasted the message as directed. Rochefort and his team waited anxiously, wondering if the Japanese would fall for the ruse. 2 days later, on May 22, Station Hypo intercepted a Japanese intelligence communication from Tokyo to various commands. The message indicated that AF was experiencing a water shortage and would need additional supplies for an upcoming operation. This prompted celebration in the room as it confirmed Midway's identity. There was now no doubt about their location. Rochefort promptly informed Leighton, who briefed Nimitz on the same day. The commander of the Pacific Fleet now had definitive knowledge of where the Japanese planned to attack. However, identifying the target was only part of the equation. They also needed to determine when and with what force the assault would occur. During the last week of May, Hypo worked tirelessly around the clock. Every intercepted message was analyzed with intense focus. They desperately sought confirmation of the date. Finnegan concentrated on deciphering the super-enciphered datatime groups, which were considered the most secure part of the Japanese communication system. He sifted through thousands of messages to identify patterns in how the Japanese encoded dates. On May 25, he cracked the code. This breakthrough in cryptanalysis enabled them to decode the timing of Japanese operations. The team promptly began analyzing a backlog of messages concerning the AF operation. By May 26, a clear picture emerged. The Japanese were amassing an enormous fleet: 4 aircraft carriers, 2 battleships, numerous cruisers and destroyers, an invasion force with troops destined for Midway after air strikes, submarine patrols to intercept American reinforcements, and a diversionary force targeting the Aleutian Islands to draw American attention northward. The primary assault on Midway would occur in early June, most likely on June 4th or 5th. The attack would approach from the northwest, arriving at dawn for aircraft deployment. On May 27, 1942, as USS Yorktown limped into Pearl Harbor with evident damage from the Coral Sea battle, Edwin Leighton entered Admiral Nimitz's office for his daily intelligence briefing. What he was about to reveal seemed almost unbelievable. The intercepted Japanese communications provided precise details, not only the target and timing, but also the exact bearing of their approach, the distance at which they would launch aircraft, and even the estimated time of the attack. Layton's prediction that the Japanese would approach from a bearing of 325 degrees, approximately 175 miles from Midway, with an attack set to begin around 0700 hours on June 4th, was based on decrypted operational orders. Nimitz listened intently and inquired about confidence levels. Layton was certain this was not mere analysis but direct insight into the enemy's plans. Nimitz made his decision. He would position his carriers northwest of Midway, setting up an ambush for the approaching Japanese force. The Japanese were unaware that American codebreakers had cracked JN-25. They anticipated being caught off guard, yet it turned out they would be the ones to experience surprise instead. Nimitz encountered a significant challenge. The USS Yorktown, which was damaged in the Battle of Coral Sea, was docked at Pearl Harbor for repairs. Navy experts estimated that the carrier would require 3 months to get back into service. However, Nimitz only gave his team 3 days to complete the work. He needed every available carrier for the upcoming confrontation. Over 400 civilian workers from the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard poured onto Yorktown, working non-stop to cut and weld metal, replace damaged parts, and seal breaches. To supply power for the welding equipment, rolling electrical blackouts were enforced across Oahu. Exactly 72 hours after entering dry dock, Yorktown left Pearl Harbor with repair crews still on board, joining the task force gathering north of Midway. On June 3, 1942, American patrol planes spotted Japanese vessels approaching from the west. Early in the morning of June 4th, radar operators at Midway detected incoming aircraft from the northwest. Exactly as Layton had predicted. At 72 hours, precisely 2 minutes after Layton's projected time, Japanese planes attacked Midway, though the American carriers were not where the Japanese anticipated them to be. Instead, they were positioned northeast of Midway, ready and waiting. Upon receiving initial contact reports that morning, Nimitz commented to Layton that his prediction had been accurate within a margin of just 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles. This was one of the most precise pieces of tactical intelligence in naval history. The Battle of Midway lasted from June 4th to June 7th, 1942. American dive bombers caught 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, with their aircraft being rammed on deck. Within minutes, all 3 were ablaze and would later sink. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterattack that damaged Yorktown, but U.S. aircraft located and destroyed Hiryu the same afternoon. In exchange for Yorktown and the destroyer USS Hammond, which was torpedoed while aiding the stricken carrier, the United States Navy sank all 4 Japanese fleet carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor. Approximately 290 Japanese aircraft and 370 men were lost during the battle. On the other side, the Americans suffered losses of around 145 aircraft and 307 personnel. Significantly more critical was Japan's loss of 4 highly skilled carrier crews, pilots, and support staff who could not be easily replaced. Following this defeat, the Japanese Navy would never again match its pre-Midway striking power. Beyond Midway, Station Hypo continued to break down JN-25 throughout the war. The Japanese remained unaware that their codes had been compromised. Despite periodic changes in additives and code books, cryptanalysts consistently kept up with these updates. Known as Ultra, this intelligence heavily influenced every major American operation in the Pacific Theater. Whenever Japanese forces moved or convoys sailed, American commanders were often ahead of the curve thanks to decrypted messages. When enemy aircraft were deployed to new bases, American bombers had precise target locations due to intercepted communications. One notable instance occurred in April 1943, when cryptanalysts decoded a message revealing Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's flight plan from Rabaul to Bougainville on the 18th of that month. The detailed route and timing were provided. Admiral Nimitz authorized an interception mission, dispatching 18 P-38 fighters from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. They flew over 500 miles to intercept Yamamoto's transport aircraft, arriving right on time and course. Both Japanese planes were downed, resulting in Admiral Yamamoto's death in the jungle of Bougainville. The success of this operation underscored the critical role played by American cryptanalysts who could decrypt Japan's most secure naval communications. Operation Vengeance showcased the impact of signals intelligence on altering the course of war. Just 1 month after the Battle of Midway, this intelligence triumph nearly led to disaster. 1942. The Chicago Tribune published a front-page article by reporter Stanley Johnston titled "Navy Had Word of Plan to Strike at Sea." The piece strongly suggested that the Navy had advanced knowledge of Japanese battle plans through codebreaking. Johnston, who had been aboard USS Lexington during the Battle of the Coral Sea and had access to classified dispatches, came perilously close to revealing that American cryptanalysts could decipher Japanese codes. President Franklin Roosevelt and Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox were outraged and demanded that Johnston be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. A grand jury investigated but declined to press charges. Thankfully, the Japanese either did not see or misunderstand the article's implications and continued using GN-25 undeterred. The groundwork for this achievement was laid in the early 1920s when Lieutenant Lawrence Safford realized that future conflicts would hinge not just on weaponry and naval strength but also on information. Known later as the father of Navy cryptology, Safford founded the Navy's first organized codebreaking unit in 1924. Initially modest, consisting only of a few officers working manually with pencils and paper to analyze diplomatic and military communications from potential adversaries, it was an early step toward a sophisticated intelligence operation. Recognizing Japan's emergence as a Pacific power and its future challenge to American interests, Safford began recruiting individuals with unique skills. Linguists who had lived in Japan, mathematicians adept at discerning patterns within chaos, and radio operators skilled at extracting signals from the airwaves. By the early 1930s, the Navy had established intercept stations across the Pacific, including one at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, another at Cavite in the Philippines, and a third based in Washington, D.C. These locations would ultimately form the backbone of America's signal intelligence network. Among Safford's recruits was Joseph Rochefort, an officer whose career became intertwined with the decoding of Japanese communications. In 1918, at just 17 years old, Rochefort enlisted in the Navy by falsifying his age during WWII. From the start, he demonstrated exceptional skills in languages and puzzles, which did not go unnoticed by his superiors. Rather than being deployed to sea, they assigned him to work in Washington with the code and signal section. This role allowed him to become deeply involved in the Navy's early cryptographic endeavors, where he found his true passion. In 1929, Rochefort was sent to Tokyo for a 3-year period to master Japanese language and culture. During this time, he immersed himself not only in linguistic studies, but also in understanding Japan's military structure and how its officers communicated and thought. It was during this assignment that he met Edwin Layton, another young officer who would later play a significant role in future conflicts. The two men developed a close friendship built on their shared interest in Japan and the belief that knowledge of the enemy's language and culture would be vital for any potential war. The Japanese introduced their most advanced naval code on June 1, 1939. American cryptanalysts labeled this system JN-25, EJN stood for Japanese Navy, and 25 indicated it was the 25th such system identified by the Americans. Unlike simpler substitution ciphers, JN-25 was a complex 2-step code system that made decryption incredibly challenging. First, operators would consult a code book containing around 33,000 entries, each represented by a 5-digit number group. However, instead of transmitting these numbers directly, they added another layer of security through the use of additive tables. This involved combining the original 5-digit code with a second 5-digit number from a separate book to create a third distinct 5-digit sequence that had no apparent connection to the initial code. The additive was updated frequently, sometimes as often as every few months. To decipher a message, American cryptanalysts had to remove the additive and then correlate the resulting code groups with their meanings in the code book. By late 1940, combined efforts of American and British cryptanalysts yielded significant progress against JN-25. They understood the structure of the system, but could only decode about 10% of the code groups, roughly 3,800 out of 33,000. However, their work was painstakingly slow due to a limited number of analysts and scarce intercepts, making full penetration seem years away. Then on December 1st, 1940, the Japanese introduced a major overhaul by implementing a completely new codebook later identified as JN25B. This meant that every meaning for each code group had changed, forcing cryptanalysts to start from scratch. They began painstakingly reconstructing their knowledge through traffic analysis, educated guesses about common phrases, and ingenious deductions. By October 1941, they were making progress again. Approximately 1,500 code groups had been identified. Hopes were rising that by the following spring, they might achieve a reasonable understanding of current messages. However, these hopes were dampened on December 4th, 1941, when the Japanese introduced new additive tables designated as Additive 8, just 3 days before the Pearl Harbor attack. Although not as devastating as switching to an entirely new codebook, this change still required cryptanalysts to recover the new additives before they could read messages, a process that would take weeks. When Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, cryptanalysts felt it as a personal failure. They had spent 2 years working on JN25. If only their initial penetration had been more effective, and if the additive change on December 4th hadn't temporarily obscured their view. Might they have spotted signs of the approaching enemy fleet? This question would linger with them, especially for Joseph Rochefort, who took over command at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor in June 1941. A significant shift occurred in the basement of the 14th Naval District Administration Building at Pearl Harbor, an unassuming concrete structure near the submarine base that few noticed. Down a narrow staircase past security checkpoints was a room destined to become the epicenter of the Pacific War. Station Hypo measured 60 feet in length and lacked windows. It was illuminated by constant humming fluorescent lights. The air conditioning system struggled against the heat produced by IBM tabulating machines and the bodies of numerous analysts working non-stop. This is where Joseph Rochefort and his team would carry out their mission. Rochefort, a commander with an eccentric streak, often worked 72-hour shifts without leaving the basement. He wore a smoking jacket and slippers due to the cold nights caused by the air conditioning. He sometimes went days without shaving or sleeping, chain smoking and consuming gallons of coffee. Yet, he expected nothing but excellence from himself and his team. He had personally chosen many members of his unit, including Thomas Deere, an exceptionally talented cryptanalyst who played a crucial role in deciphering JN25 and devised procedures for using IBM machines to process encrypted messages. Oliver Laswell, a Japanese language expert with extensive Tokyo-based education, was adept at understanding military communications nuances. Hamwright worked closely with DR on the most challenging code segments. Joseph Finnegan, a mathematician whose contributions to daytime groups would prove vital, and numerous enlisted men, many of whom were musicians from the band of the USS California sunk during Pearl Harbor. With nowhere else to go, these individuals found themselves assigned to Hypo. Numerous individuals demonstrated the requisite mathematical and analytical skills necessary for codebreaking. Rochefort argued that musicians capable of reading sheet music had pattern recognition abilities that could be effectively applied to identifying recurring numerical sequences in encrypted communications. The work at Station Hypo was both monotonous and arduous. Intercepted messages arrived as streams of 5-digit numbers, with hundreds of such messages arriving daily by early 1942. Each message needed thorough processing. Initially, analysts removed additive values if they had been recovered. Then they attempted to match the resulting code groups to known meanings. However, most remained unknown. Analysts maintained card files for every instance of each code group, recording details such as context and participants in an effort to deduce their meanings through repetition and association. When a specific code group appeared frequently in messages concerning carrier operations, it might indicate references to carriers, aircraft, fuel supplies, or ammunition. The analysts relied heavily on logic, intuition, and meticulous cross-referencing to narrow down possible interpretations. IBM tabulating machines played a crucial role in this process. These same machines were widely used by corporations for accounting and data processing tasks. Thomas Dyer had introduced their application in cryptography during the 1930s. At Station Hypo, punch card operators from the Navy's clerical staff converted intercepted messages into punch cards. The machines could sort, count, and cross-reference at speeds far beyond human capability. Upon encountering a particular code group, the machine could swiftly retrieve all previous occurrences, enabling analysts to spot patterns that would have taken weeks to identify manually. The constant clatter of these machines echoed day and night as operators worked tirelessly on data preparation for cryptanalysis. Progress was gradual throughout the winter of 1941 and into early 1942. By Christmas of 1941, Station Hypo had managed to recover sufficient information about the new additive system to start decoding parts of intercepted messages once more. By February, they were identifying fresh code groups each day. By April 1942, around 20% of the captured communications could be understood. The analysts could decipher approximately 1 word out of every 5. While this might seem insignificant, it was often sufficient for military communication analysis. Japanese naval messages adhered to standardized formats. Reports on positions, fuel levels, personnel assignments, and operational directives all followed predictable structures. If the analysts were familiar with the message type and could read 20% of its content, they frequently managed to deduce the rest. One breakthrough stood out as especially important. Mathematician Joseph Finnegan observed that date and time information in messages was encrypted using a distinct method. The Japanese aimed to conceal the timing of their operations, thus treating these details with extra caution during encryption. However, Finnegan identified a pattern within this system. He devised what he termed a Twonplex 31 garble check, mathematical technique for verifying whether suspected date-time code groups were accurate. By April 1942, Station Hypo was able to discern the dates mentioned in intercepted messages even when other parts remained unclear. This capability would prove invaluable as events unfolded. Throughout April and into early May of 1942, Station Hypo analysts noticed an increasing number of references to a target designated AF within Japanese communications. The Japanese utilized 2 letter codes for locations to maintain secrecy. Pearl Harbor was referred to as AH, while illusions were denoted by AO. However, AF appeared with unusual frequency in the messages. These communiques mentioned troop concentrations, air units, and supply ships all related to AF. This traffic strongly indicated that a significant operation was being planned. However, there was uncertainty about the location of F. Some experts in Washington speculated that it might be Alusia, America's northernmost territory. Others suggested it could be Port Moresby in New Guinea or even the western coast of the United States. Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo, however, were convinced that AF was Midway Island, a small American outpost situated approximately 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. Yet, conviction alone wasn't sufficient. Nimitz required concrete evidence before committing his scarce carrier forces. In mid-May 1942, Captain Wilfred Holmes, a submarine officer attached to Station Hypo, devised an ingenious plan. If AF were indeed Midway Island, he proposed misleading the Japanese into inadvertently confirming it by having Midway send out an unencrypted radio message about water supply issues. The message would indicate that fresh water was running low and needed replenishment. Given the likelihood of Japanese intelligence intercepting this communication, a response from Tokyo could potentially reveal AF's true identity as Midway. Nimitz approved Holmes' strategy. On May 19th and 20th, 1942, an uncoded message was sent from Midway to Pearl Harbor via underwater cable, which was then relayed by radio in a low-level cipher that the Japanese had already cracked. This message reported mechanical troubles with the water distillation system and requested immediate supplies of fresh water. Station Hypo's analysts patiently waited for any signs of confirmation. On May 27, just 2 days later, they intercepted a Japanese intelligence report. After decrypting it, the message revealed that AF was experiencing a shortage of water. This confirmed Rochefort's hypothesis that AF was indeed Midway Island. With this evidence, the analysts could now concentrate their efforts on predicting when and with what force the impending attack would occur. By the end of May, the intelligence scenario became increasingly clear. Station Hypo was analyzing between 500 and 1,000 Japanese communications daily as units prepared for their mission. Each message contributed to a detailed picture that emerged over time. The cryptanalysts pinpointed which carriers would be involved: Akaji, Kaga, Shokaku, and Zukoku, 4 of the ships that had attacked Pearl Harbor 6 months prior. They recorded when different units departed from Japanese ports and plotted their projected route toward Midway. They also estimated the composition of the invasion force. On May 27, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton entered Admiral Nimitz's office with his latest intelligence report. This meeting occurred on the same day that USS Yorktown, damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea, arrived at Pearl Harbor for repairs. Layton and Nimitz held a daily intelligence briefing every morning at 8:00, but this particular session was unique. Layton presented information so precise that Nimitz would later describe it as almost unbelievable. The Japanese were approaching from the northwest, according to Layton. They would be detected at a bearing of 3255 and about 175 miles away from Midway Island on June 4th around 700 hours. The assault force would consist of 4 fleet carriers accompanied by battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, with an invasion group following close behind. The Japanese strategy was to eliminate American air defenses at Midway before supporting the landing of ground troops tasked with seizing the island. What set Layton's briefing apart was not only its level of detail, but also his unwavering confidence in presenting it. This was not speculation or conjecture based on partial data. It stemmed from intercepting and decoding enemy communications. The team led by Commander Joseph Rochefort at Station Hypo had cracked the JN-25 code sufficiently to decipher Japanese operational directives. As a result, they understood the adversary's strategy as clearly as if they were privy to Admiral Yamamoto's planning meetings. Nimitz received this intelligence with composure and inquired about confidence levels, potential alternative explanations, and possible consequences should the information prove inaccurate. Layton addressed each query with assurance. Hypo had rigorously validated their findings through extensive cross-referencing of numerous intercepted messages. All indicators pointed to a Japanese assault on Midway scheduled for June 4th. Nimitz then made his strategic decision. He would deploy the carriers northwest of Midway, positioning them to ambush the approaching Japanese fleet. The Japanese were unaware that American cryptographers had cracked JN-25 and anticipated catching the Americans off guard. Instead, they would be caught by surprise themselves. However, Nimitz encountered a complication. USS Yorktown, damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea, was undergoing repairs in dry dock at Pearl Harbor with an estimated 3-month turnaround time. Yet, Nimitz ordered the carrier to be ready for deployment within just 3 days. He required all available carriers for the impending battle. On June 3, 1942, civilian workers numbering 400 from the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard boarded Yorktown to carry out urgent repairs. These dedicated personnel worked non-stop, cutting and welding, replacing damaged parts and patching up holes. To facilitate this intensive repair work, rolling electrical blackouts were enforced across Oahu to provide essential power for the welding machines. 3 days after entering dry dock at Pearl Harbor, Yorktown emerged with repair crews still on board, ready to join the task force forming north of Midway. Radar operators stationed on Midway detected incoming Japanese aircraft from the northwest early in the morning on June 4th, exactly as predicted by Layton. At precisely 07:02 hours, just 2 minutes later than Layton's forecasted time, the first wave of Japanese planes struck Midway. However, contrary to Japanese expectations, American carriers were positioned northeast of Midway, awaiting their arrival. Upon receiving initial contact, reports that morning, Nimitz commented to Leighton that his prediction was accurate within 5 minutes, 5 degrees, and 5 miles, a remarkable feat of tactical intelligence in naval history. The Battle of Midway unfolded from 4th through June 7, 1942. American dive bombers located 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, with their aircraft being refueled on deck. Within minutes, all 3 were ablaze and would soon sink. Meanwhile, Hiyu launched a retaliatory assault that damaged Yorktown, but by late afternoon, American aircraft had found and destroyed Hiyu. In this engagement, the United States lost 1 carrier, Yorktown, along with the destroyer USS Hammond, which was torpedoed while aiding the stricken carrier. In contrast, Japan suffered significant losses, 4 fleet carriers sunk, 290 aircraft destroyed, and approximately 3,570 personnel casualties. The Americans sustained about 145 aircraft lost and 307 fatalities. Crucially, Japan also forfeited seasoned carrier crews, pilots, and support staff who could not be easily replaced. Following the Battle of Midway, the Japanese Navy would never regain its previous striking power. Furthermore, the intelligence edge that contributed to this victory extended beyond Midway's conclusion. Throughout World War II, Station Hypo successfully decrypted JN-25 without the Japanese High Command ever suspecting a breach in their security, despite periodic updates to additives and code books. Cryptanalysts consistently managed to stay ahead of these changes. The intelligence gleaned from JN-25, known as Ultra, profoundly influenced American strategic decisions across the Pacific theater. Whenever Japanese forces relocated or naval convoys departed, American commanders were privy to this information well in advance. This foresight allowed them to deploy submarines strategically along enemy routes and direct bombers toward newly established air bases with precision. One of the most significant applications of ultra-intelligence occurred on April 18, 1943. Cryptanalysts intercepted a communication disclosing Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's travel plans from Rabaul to Bougainville. The message detailed his flight path and timing accurately enough for Admiral Nimitz to authorize an ambush. 18 P-38 Lightning fighters dispatched from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal intercepted both Japanese aircraft precisely as scheduled, leading to the downing of Yamamoto's transport plane and ultimately causing his death in Bougainville's jungles. This operation, known as Operation Vengeance, showcased the pivotal role that signals intelligence played in altering the outcome of the war. However, this critical breakthrough nearly met with a catastrophic setback shortly after the Battle of Midway, 1942. The Chicago Tribune published an article by reporter Stanley Johnston titled "The Navy Had Word of Japan to Strike at Sea." The piece strongly suggested that the Navy possessed advanced knowledge of Japanese battle strategies through code-breaking techniques. Johnston had previously served aboard USS Lexington during the Battle of the Coral Sea and had access to classified dispatches. His article nearly exposed that American cryptanalysts could decipher Japanese codes, which enraged President Roosevelt and Navy Secretary Frank Knox. They insisted Johnston be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, but a grand jury declined to indict him. Fortunately for everyone involved, the Japanese were unaware of the article's implications and continued using JN-25 without suspecting any breaches. Joseph Rochefort received no recognition for his efforts. In October 1942, despite playing a pivotal role in enabling the victory at Midway, Rochefort was reassigned from Hypo to oversee construction on the West Coast due to bureaucratic disputes in Washington. The move came about because Admiral Ernest King's intelligence staff, led by Captain John Redman and his brother Commander Joseph Redman, resented direct communication between Rochefort and Nimitz rather than routing information through Washington headquarters. Additionally, they disputed some of Rochefort's assessments. When Admiral Nimitz recommended Rochefort for the Distinguished Service Medal right after Midway, King blocked the nomination. For the rest of the war, Rochefort was sidelined, with his accomplishments remaining largely unknown beyond a small circle of intelligence experts. Those who understood Rochefort's contributions felt deeply troubled by this injustice. Edwin Layton, who collaborated closely with Rochefort during those crucial months, wrote in his memoirs that Rochefort's treatment stood out as one of the war's greatest wrongs. Admiral Nimitz shared this sentiment and supported efforts to honor Rochefort after the war. However, the intelligence bureaucracy resisted these attempts until 1957, when Station Hypo received a Presidential Unit citation for its work leading up to and during the Battle of Midway. Rochefort attended the ceremony in Washington, but it was merely a token of recognition rather than what he truly deserved. On July 20, 1976, he passed away in Torrance, California, at the age of 76, still lacking the individual acclaim his accomplishments deserved. 10 years after his death, however, the Navy rectified its mistake. On May 13, 1986, President Ronald Reagan posthumously awarded Rochefort the Distinguished Service Medal during a White House ceremony. The captain's children were present alongside high-ranking defense officials such as Vice Admiral William Stewman, the director of the National Security Agency, and Vice President George Bush. The citation highlighted Rochefort's pivotal role in securing the United States' victory at Midway, crediting his relentless efforts for the success of the operation. This belated recognition finally acknowledged Rochefort's rightful place in history. Today, the Navy's intelligence school located at Dam Neck, Virginia, bears Rochefort's name, ensuring that future generations of intelligence officers will be aware of the man who cracked Japan's codes and altered the trajectory of the Pacific War. Edwin Layton, a friend of Rochefort and the individual who briefed Admiral Nimitz on May 27, 1942, similarly remained unacknowledged for decades. He served as Nimitz's intelligence officer throughout the Pacific conflict, providing crucial assessments that influenced every major operation. After the war, Layton retired with the rank of Rear Admiral but kept silent about his code-breaking activities. The work conducted at Station Hypo remained classified until the 1970s, when the National Security Agency began declassifying World War II signals intelligence records. In 1985, shortly before his death, Layton co-authored a memoir titled I Was There, Pearl Harbor and Midway, which provided the first comprehensive public account of how American cryptanalysts deciphered JN-25 and facilitated the victory at Midway. Lawrence Safford, often referred to as the father of Navy cryptology, who established the code-breaking program in 1924 and recruited key personnel like Rochefort, also faced bureaucratic challenges. In February 1942, during the peak efforts against JN-25, Safford was demoted and sidelined for the rest of the war due to Washington's internal power struggles. Like Rochefort, he retired as a captain and passed away in 1973. His foundational contributions to American signals intelligence remained largely unknown to the public until much later. In 1999, the National Security Agency inducted Safford into its Hall of Fame, acknowledging him as the architect behind all subsequent Navy coding initiatives. The personal sacrifices made by the codebreakers should not be overlooked. They worked in secret and were unable to disclose their work even to close family members. They couldn't celebrate their successes or discuss their challenges openly. After the war ended, strict confidentiality rules prevented them from discussing their efforts for many years. Classified documents remained sealed until the 1970s and early 1980s. By the time these stories could be shared publicly, numerous participants had already passed away. Rochefort died in 1976. Just as books about the Midway codebreaking were being published, he never received full public acknowledgement for his accomplishments. The organizational lessons learned at Station Hypo greatly influenced the establishment of modern intelligence agencies. The National Security Agency, founded in 1952, adopted many practices developed during this period. These included fostering collaboration between various collection and analysis sites, leveraging technology to manage large data sets, emphasizing language proficiency and cultural knowledge, and ensuring that analysts had direct communication with operational leaders. Principles proven effective during the Pacific War became cornerstones of American signals intelligence. The narrative also highlights the critical role played by individual genius in intelligence operations. Rochefort's intuitive grasp of Japanese strategic thinking, Finnegan's breakthrough on data-time encryption, Deer's mathematical insights, Laswell's linguistic expertise, Holmes's ingenious water-based deception tactics, and Leighton's skill in conveying intelligence effectively to Nimitz were all indispensable. No single individual could have cracked JN-25 alone. A team of specialists with diverse and distinctive abilities was essential, but effective leadership was also crucial for coordinating these talents. Rochefort fostered an environment where unconventional yet brilliant individuals could flourish. He shielded them from bureaucratic constraints, supplied necessary resources, and trusted their expertise. The technology utilized at Station Hypo might seem rudimentary by today's standards, yet it was groundbreaking in the early 1940s. IBM punch card machines processed data with remarkable speed for that era, but were noisy, prone to malfunction, and required frequent maintenance. The basement room where these machines operated reverberated with the sound of clattering card readers and the scent of machine oil. Breakdowns often occurred at crucial moments, necessitating quick fixes by enlisted personnel who became adept improvisation and perseverance. These early encounters with automated data processing profoundly impacted the evolution of computers post-war. Many veterans from Station Hypo went on to work in the nascent computer industry. The significance of Japanese language proficiency cannot be understated. Even after identifying a coded message, it still required translation due to the complexity of Japanese, which includes multiple levels of formality and indirect communication patterns. Military Japanese had its own unique vocabulary and grammatical structures. Translators at Station Hypo not only needed to comprehend the words, but also grasp context, cultural nuances, and the way Japanese officers communicated. Rochefort's extensive experience in Tokyo was invaluable for this task. He understood the mindset of Japanese military officers and could decipher intentions from subtle word choices. The traffic analysis aspect of the intelligence effort was equally critical. Even when messages couldn't be decrypted, valuable information was gleaned from communication patterns, such as which commands were communicating with each other, how frequently, and at what times. A sharp uptick in communications between the Fleet Command Center and carrier divisions hinted at an impending operation. The absence of radio chatter from particular units suggested they were likely out at sea, possibly nearing a target area. Adjustments to call signs or frequencies often signaled upcoming major maneuvers. Analysts at Hypo meticulously monitored these patterns, piecing together insights into Japanese naval strategy and operational rhythms. The success behind this intelligence effort extended beyond the core analytical team. Intercept stations manned by dedicated radio operators across the Pacific, from Hawaii to Australia to Alaska, worked tirelessly in challenging environments to pick up Japanese transmissions. Radio signals behaved unpredictably due to atmospheric conditions like the ionosphere, causing them to fluctuate erratically. Additionally, Japanese communicators often transmitted at rapid speeds, making it tough for American interceptors to keep pace accurately. The operators needed exceptional hearing and immense patience as they spent hours transcribing seemingly meaningless numerical sequences, aware that these numbers would eventually be deciphered by analysts into actionable intelligence. The confidentiality surrounding this mission was paramount. Only a select few were privy to the fact that JN-25 had been cracked. Those in the know included Nimitz, his senior staff, and Hypo's team. The rest of the Pacific Fleet operated under the assumption that they could not decipher Japanese communications. This secrecy was crucial because if the Japanese suspected their codes had been compromised, they would swiftly implement new systems, rendering months of painstaking work obsolete. This created a delicate balancing act. True, while intelligence revealed enemy submarines positioned in ambush along specific routes, commanders couldn't avoid these routes without risking exposure of their information source. Rather than deliberately locating submarines, they needed to ensure patrol aircraft stumbled upon them incidentally, offering a credible rationale for altered routes. Following the Battle of Midway, there was an intensification in code-breaking efforts. Additional analysts were hired and more intercept stations were set up. The IBM equipment received upgrades. By late 1942, the Navy processed thousands of intercepted Japanese communications weekly. Intelligence reports derived from these decoded messages, referred to as ultra, adopting the British term for intelligence obtained through 破解密码获得的情报。Ultra 报告通过严格的保密协议分发给指挥官，他们使用遇水即溶的特殊纸张打印，以防船只沉没时泄露，绝不能在无线电中讨论这些情报。基于 Ultra 情报采取的行动必须进行伪装，以避免让敌人怀疑其来源。这种情报指导了整个太平洋战争期间美军的所有主要战役。当美国军对于1942年跃入青瓜达尔卡纳尔岛时， Ultra 情报揭示了日本增援部队的时间和规模，这使美军能够拦截并摧毁几支向该岛运送人员和物资的东京快运船队。在1944年6月的菲律宾海战役中， Ultra 情报为雷蒙德勒斯普鲁恩斯海军上将提供了关于日本航空母舰位置和飞机数量的详细信息。这有助于彻底击溃日军航母舰队。在美国飞行员眼中，这就是著名的马里亚纳群岛烈火击行动。此外，这些情报还具有超越战术层面的战略意义，通过解读有关燃料短缺、船只损失以及资源限制的情报，美军指挥官意识到日本战争经济正在衰退，这一信息影响了哪些岛屿值得占领和哪些可以绕过的决策，并为前挺部队实施切断日军海上运输的战役提供了指导。By 1944, American submarines equipped with top secret intelligence were destroying Japanese merchant vessels faster than Japan could rebuild its fleet. The island garrisons of the empire were suffering from a severe lack of supplies. Shortages of essential resources such as oil and rubber began to plague the home islands. This had a profound psychological effect on Japanese military leaders, even though they were unaware of the source of their difficulties. They started to believe that American intelligence was nearly omniscient in its precision. How else could the Americans always seem to be in the right place at the right time? And how else could they predict every Japanese move with such accuracy? This belief fostered paranoia and doubt among the commanders, who hesitated to undertake any operations for fear of being anticipated by their adversaries. Coupled with the material losses Japan had sustained since Midway, this defensive mentality prevented Japan from regaining its strategic initiative in the Pacific. The decoding efforts also shaped Allied strategy during World War II more broadly. Intelligence obtained from the Pacific was shared with British and American strategists working on operations in Europe. Techniques developed at Station Hypo influenced the work carried out by codebreakers at Bletchley Park, who were tackling German Enigma codes. There was a mutual exchange of ideas, methodologies, and technologies between these efforts. The experience gained from breaking J in 2025 proved invaluable for post-war cryptographic analysis and became crucial during the Cold War. The influence of signals intelligence on the Pacific War can be measured in several ways. Hundreds of Japanese ships were sunk based on ultra-intelligence. Countless American lives were saved by avoiding ambushes and preparing for imminent attacks. The strategic advantage gained from knowing Japanese plans and capabilities likely shortened the war by months, if not years. Some analysts have speculated that without the intelligence breakthrough at Midway, the Pacific War could have extended into 1946 or even 1947, resulting in significantly higher casualties on both sides. However, the most profound effect was psychological. Following the Battle of Midway, American leaders engaged in combat with renewed assurance. They were aware that Japanese actions would seldom come unexpectedly. They could devise strategies confident that intelligence would alert them to any Japanese countermeasures. This sense of security filtered down through all levels of the military hierarchy. American sailors and airmen entered battles knowing their superiors possessed reliable information about potential threats, which elevated morale and combat readiness. Conversely, the Japanese increasingly fought with mounting uncertainty. Their plans consistently fell short in ways they could not comprehend. The Japanese intelligence apparatus failed to breach American communications as effectively as the Americans did for theirs. This disparity in intelligence gathering significantly contributed to Japan's ultimate defeat, rivaling any material factor in importance. At its core, the tale of Station Hypo and the decryption of JN-25 illustrates the pivotal role of information in contemporary warfare. It underscores that victories are not solely achieved by courageous soldiers and powerful weaponry, but also by analysts laboring in basement offices, linguists deciphering intercepted messages, and mathematicians discerning patterns from chaos. Admiral Nimitz's decision to rely on Rochefort's intelligence and commit his carriers based on decrypted communications exemplifies one of the most remarkable acts of command courage in military history. Despite widespread skepticism among peers regarding the reliability of such precise information, he took a calculated risk that paid off with the United States' greatest naval triumph during World War II. For future generations of military and intelligence professionals, the message is unequivocal: intelligence is not merely an ancillary component of military operations, it is essential. A leader armed with robust intelligence can make decisions surpassing those made by counterparts lacking such crucial information. Investments in intelligence gathering and analysis yield returns that far exceed their costs. The small team at Hypo, comprising just a few hundred individuals using IBM machines along with their linguistic prowess and mathematical acumen, made more significant contributions to the Pacific theater than many combat units 10 times larger. They did not engage in direct combat. Instead, they fought through strategic information. When commanders wisely utilized this data, it emerged as the most potent weapon available. This narrative underscores the value of intelligence, highlights the significance of readiness, and celebrates the bravery of leaders willing to act on insights despite prevailing skepticism. On May 27, 1942, Admiral Nimitz learned that he could decipher every Japanese secret. A week later, he leveraged this knowledge to secure victory in the Battle of Midway. Although the war continued for another 3 years following Midway, Japan's fate was no longer uncertain. The United States' industrial capacity would ultimately triumph. It all started with a small group of analysts working from a basement office in Hawaii who cracked an ostensibly unbreakable code and provided their commander with foresight into future events.